The Irish public have reason to fear what's happening to our nearest neighbour, as British citizens are being arrested for exercising free speech. And now the Labour Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is attempting to trap the population into biometric digital ID to access work. In this episode, I talk to former MEP and leader of Advance UK, Ben Habib. I'm Eddie Hobbs. Let's break it down. First, see Keir Starmer announcing the Brit card.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free of charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID.
You're very welcome to Counterpoint, Ben. Well, you've really got your work cut out with arrests for free speech violations running at around 12,000, and now this lunge towards a digital GULAG. Is that a fair description?
Well, in my mind, it's self-evident that digital ID will only have effect on those people who are law-abiding. It's the law-abiding citizens of the country who will be subjected to digital ID. Everyone else who's either working illegally already or comes into the country illegally in the future, is going to sidestep the requirements for digital ID. It won't have any beneficial effect on cutting back on criminal working, the black market, as it were, in employment. It'll simply act as a further dilution of our civil liberties. But as you rightly said, Eddie, we live in a world in which our freedom of speech is being cut down. This is yet another step away from us being a free people. And it is the trajectory on which successive governments have been taking our country. Next we'll have central bank digital currencies. Cash has already been seriously cut back, but then we'll get central bank digital currencies, and they'll know precisely what we're spending our money on. They'll be able to micromanage precisely what we do with our lives. And this is, as I say, got nothing to do with controlling the criminal element, because the criminal element step round all of this in any event. They're already stepping around whatever regulations what we have. All this will do is regulate and control and rob law-abiding citizens of their civil liberties.
Yeah, I don't think too many people watching in, even from Ireland and certainly from Britain, accepted that pale excuse that it was all about migration at face value. And what has been the public reaction there and the political reaction, Ben?
Well, I think it's anecdotal because I don't think there's ever been a poll done on it, but there was huge resistance to ID cards when Blair tried to bring them in. Mm. And I think the mood of the nation is anti-digital ID. It's so evidently not going to control criminal elements. Criminal elements step round regulations. Regulations are only ever adhered to and only ever in the end control those who are law-abiding. When you move, as we've done over decades in this country, away from a legal system that's based on substance to a legal system that's based on form, in other words, ticking boxes, making sure you've got the requisite paperwork and so on and so forth, criminals love it because they can absolutely make themselves experts in dealing with the forms that with which they need to comply, whereas the rest of us are absolutely hamstrung by it. And they can use the hurdles put in place to actually disguise their criminal activity. This is going to have in absolutely the opposite effect that the Prime Minister says it's going to have. But even if it were to work the way the Prime Minister thinks it could work, it'll have zero impact on criminality. They're already breaking the law to get their jobs and do whatever they do.
Yeah, no, it's quite clearly, in my opinion anyway, it's quite clearly part of the whole control the population programme. What's extraordinary for me, watching from here, is that this is actually happening in the United Kingdom, of all countries to try and pioneer it in. I would have thought it would be the hardest nut to crack, especially since it would appear that trust in the UK government is close to all-time lows, from what I can see. Is that your sense of it as well?
think that's absolutely right. I think the British people have absolutely lost faith in our governing institutions, and you can see that with voter turnout. You know, if you go back to Boris Johnson's election in 2019, voter turnout was something like 67.5%. In the last election, in which Labour got a massive majority by number of seats, voter turnout was 59%. So big reduction, 10% reduction in voter turnout. And Labour got fewer votes in 2024 than they did in 2019. And that was because it was a pox on all your houses by the British electorate. They're getting sick and tired of the political class. And I think what Starmer's doing is an abuse of the British people, because even though he has a majority, he knows he doesn't have popular support, and he's driving through policies which he knows to be anti what the British people want. I mean, it doesn't just stop at digital IDs. He's taking us back in closer. We never really left the European Union, but we voted to leave the EU, and he's taking us even closer to the EU than we've ever been in the last few years since Boris Johnson did those awful deals with the EU. So, for example, he's signing up to sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, dynamic alignment with the EU. He's signing up to the carbon tax arrangements with the EU. He is about to hand over our armed forces to the control of the EU. And all of this, you and I were chatting before we went live, all of this is to do with the global order. All of this is to do with governance for the global, through a global prism as opposed to a national prism. And you know, if you're prepared to be undemocratic to the extent that you will hand over power to a foreign power like the EU, you need to control civil liberty. You need to reduce civil liberty. You need to control speech, because you're doing something that is inherently undemocratic and therefore against the interests of the majority of the people. So it's no accident in my mind that Starmer, who I believe to be anti-British, is doing successive things against the popular vote, driving them through, and then having to control free speech, having to dilute our civil liberties to prevent us from being able to object.
I think that's a very, very well made point. And I just got to throw up a slide here on screen, Ben, just about what's been happening in the United Kingdom when it comes to cracking down on free speech versus what's been happening elsewhere. So here we can see, this is an outsized measurement, really, 2023, of the number of arrests for various pieces of legislation. My notes say the Online Safety Act of 2023 was the most recent, but it goes way back to the Malicious Communications Act of 1988 and the Public Order Act of 1986. But it seems to me that the turning point in terms of popular commentary was the arrest of Graham Linehan. Did you see it that way, or is that an exaggeration?
Well, I think the public got it when he was arrested, but of course it's been going on for a hell of a lot longer than that. Yeah. You'll remember Alison Pearson, the journalist for The Telegraph, who was questioned on a tweet that she did, about a year or two before she was actually questioned. Lucy Connolly, who was put in prison for saying, "For all I care, they can all burn," but "for all I care" were mitigating words. They were not an incitement to violence, and she was locked up for 2 years and 8 months. Same with Peter Lynch, a 61-year-old grandfather who was incarcerated not for what he did, but for what he said. And he hanged himself a couple of months into his prison sentence. And we see this again and again, and we see it with Tommy Robinson. I know many people love Tommy Robinson. Many people don't like Tommy Robinson. They see him as the Voldemort of British politics, a sort of so-called far-right, tattooed up, National Front type thug. But actually, of course, he's none of that. He's been painted as that. But he gets the book thrown at him repeatedly. When he was put in prison last year, in October, I think he was in prison last year, it was a completely political imprisonment. Next week, Eddie, on the 13th of October, Tommy Robinson is up on charges of terrorism, under terrorism legislation. Now, whatever you think of Tommy Robinson, whether he's a thug or whatever you think of him, He's clearly not a terrorist, is he?
No.
He's not a terrorist. And so our system is being abused. Our criminal justice system is being abused. Our ability to speak is being shut down, and our civil liberties are being stripped of us. And for Starmer is very quick to say, oh, those of you who believe in the sovereign United Kingdom, those of you who want to make policies for the betterment of this country and its people, you're all far right, you're all fascists. Actually, what is more totalitarian than robbing us of our civil liberties and shutting down free speech and chucking us in jail for what we've said? That is totalitarianism. The extremism is coming from Starmer and people like Starmer. It's not coming from people like me.
Yeah, I mean that's the irony, isn't it? That the government is actually out of step with the people, because we've had that over here as well. We've had the national broadcaster and mainstream media deliberately undercounting the number of people that are just peaceful people coming out, walking. I noticed there that this happened again in London during that recent rally. The numbers seem to be several 100,000, if not 1 million, turned out in central London, and it was put down as 110,000. It clearly wasn't. I mean, how do you expect to get away with that visually? Yeah,
I mean, I spoke at that rally.
Oh, did you?
And I was it was the biggest rally at which I've ever spoken, and I was set back from the stage in the green room area. But I could see, I was watching the thing on my phone, and the crowd went from Whitehall to Parliament Square. I'm sure your audience can imagine the geography. From Whitehall to Parliament Square, right across Westminster Bridge, down the side of the embankment, past Waterloo, all the way to Tate Modern. And the crowd also was piled up on the northern side of the embankment. And it was, people could not move. And the press described it as 110,000, Sky News, BBC called it 110,000 people. It was hundreds of thousands of people. There were millions of people watching online. And instead of Starmer the next day coming out and saying, actually, we recognize the British people are calling us out to do something different to what we've been doing, and we are going to adjust our ways, he came out and he did the same old thing of saying, you're all far right, you're all racist, xenophobic, whatever it is, and dismiss them. And, one of the things that I think is a real testimony to failing government, Eddie, is the progressive steps that government has had to take to protect Parliament. Parliament used to be a building which you could walk up to in the 1980s. Now, and it's taken progressive steps back from that. First, there were barricades, and then there were police huts put up and so on. Now, Eddie, I don't know if you've been to Parliament recently in London. There is a 9-foot tall metal fence right around it.
No,
it is the absolute optical representation of those that govern us, separating themselves from the people because they feel threatened by the people. And they feel threatened by the people because they're not doing the right thing by the people. The problem is with government. The problem is with failed ideologies, extreme ideologies like mass immigration, open borders, progressive discrimination, net zero policies that are so damaging to the economy and to people's livelihoods, massive taxation, massive spending, massive regulations, interference in our private lives, the stripping of our civil liberties. And of course, we said we weren't going to talk about lockdown, but I think it's worth mentioning. Forcing people to be locked up in their homes, forcing them to have vaccines. All of this is extreme ideology, and it's being perpetrated by people who claim to be Democrats. They're not. They're anti-democratic. They're anti the majority. They're anti the interests of this country and its people.
Yeah, what I find interesting and extraordinary at the same time is that when you take the British fertility rate, which is worsening. It's not anywhere near the stabilization rate. By the way, Ireland is only a little bit better, but not by a lot. And you look at that, and then you look at your net immigration flows coming into the country on this trajectory by 2050 to 2060, somewhere around there. The English will be a minority in England. I can't see them. I just don't see them allowing that to happen, knowing them as well as we do as neighbours, because the same thing is happening over here. How do you see that playing out? Because it's
we're in last chance saloon, Eddie. I think the country we are facing an existential threat to the United Kingdom. and possibly to Ireland, and I think Western civilization more generally. The policies that I've just described being practiced right across Europe, aren't they? I mean, the EU absolutely loves this kind of rubbish. Look at the EU. I know you don't have the Schengen, you're not members of the Schengen zone, but the Schengen zone is the most daft concept on earth. Taking down your borders. Nation states who over centuries, thousands of years, established borders, recognizing that borders were necessary for their own protection, unilaterally taking them down and allowing anything to happen between countries. It is daft as brushes. And unless we get a grip of this ridiculous direction of travel for Europe and for Western civilization more generally, we are going to find ourselves gone.
And what even makes it more remarkable, and again it echoes over here, is that the strain that this is causing on infrastructure and on housing and school places and so on from these excessive inflows is causing significant problems for the native population and the cost of living. Because you seem to also, the biggest concern in the British public is no different from the Irish public, which is just making ends meet, especially with energy prices going through the roof and all of the other inflation.
Ultimately, it's about whether or not you feel confident in your ability to feed yourself, have a roof over your head, and go about your business peaceably. And these policies that are being practiced absolutely militate against that. Mass migration with huge burdens, mass importation of entirely unskilled people. I see them all over London and the United Kingdom more generally, more actually outside London than inside London. Mass unskilled. We talk about low skill, importation of low skill. No. This is unskilled. We are taking people from the depths of Punjab who've never been to Karachi or Islamabad or Lahore or anywhere else. And we're flying them straight into the UK and making them part of our population. It's absolutely absurd. This is not taking the best of the world so that we as a country become more economically successful. This is absolutely massive burden on our infrastructure and nothing to add from a GDP perspective. And GDP per capita, no surprise, for quarter after quarter, I think it's over 4 years now, GDP per capita has been going down. We are getting poorer and poorer as a nation.
You are, and your debt is pretty high relative to GDP as well. I mean, it's quite a trap. But did you take some hope from, the biggest beast on the block, whatever you think about him, going into the United Nations and basically tearing the place down on two major points?
I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved it. I thought Trump's speech was spot on, and Milei's speech. I don't know if you watched his speech in the UN. That was also pretty damn firing, spot on. The UN started off as a good idea. It never really ever functioned properly, but it started off as a good idea. Nation state, the great nation states of the world coming together, making sure that they aired their differences through debate and reaching solutions. And hopefully everyone was better off with that. But it went from there to not just being a forum for debate. It became an organism, an entity in its own right. It became a politically active, the UN. It started imposing its view of life on how we should all be behaving. Before we came on air, the UN sustainability criteria to which we all now must dance. This is political activism from organizations which should just be talking shops.
Yeah. Do you know what? You know what's amazing about the United Nations from our perspective is that we have a hidden program for government here, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, which were designed by our civil servants, by the way, along with some Kenyans back in the day. And this is driving all our policy, including, the net zero, which Trump blew up inside the United Nations. Yeah. And then he blew up, he basically accused the United Nations of financing these excessive flows throughout the world, including into the southern border of the United States, until he closed it. And the reaction of the Irish mainstream media was just to attack Trump personally. Nobody wanted to talk about what he just did. This is the biggest economy in the world. Basically said, we're out of here. We're having none of this. And by the way,
I see that all the time. I was just watching Sky News just now, just before I came on with you, talking about the peace deal that Trump has, managed to apparently establish in the Middle East between the Palestinians and Israel. And instead of talking about peace deal, they were all attacking Trump's personality. And I was thinking, for God's sake, we've had over 2 years of violence in the Middle East. Everyone's wanted peace. He seems to be on the precipice of delivering it. And all they can do is attack him personally. It's a peculiar thing, isn't it? That they can't dissociate character and personality from actually the principles and policies that are being discussed. And it's something we've got to get over. We've got to look past the individual, play the ball, not the man. It's terrible.
Now, Ben, your party, Advance UK, is going all in on the general election 2029, contesting every constituency, which for an Irish audience is well over 600 seats, I think, as far as. And like, in the event that that you manage, and because it wouldn't be unusual, we're seeing this happening in Europe as well, in certain countries, which we've covered in our last episode here in Counterpoint. But in the event that you're successful, and you're in, what would be your top priority day one?
We are going to have a manifesto. By the time we get to the general election, we're going to have a manifesto of policies which will have appended to it all the draft legislation which we're going to pass and we're going to bring into Parliament on the first day of an advanced UK government. And that draft legislation will basically unpick the massive constitutional damage done to this country from Tony Blair onwards. We are going to get rid of all the policies and the laws that have turned this country away from managing itself for its benefit to managing itself for the benefit of the apparent global order. So we're going to get rid of progressive discrimination. We'll repeal the Equalities Act. We're going to get rid of net zero, get rid of the Climate Change Act. We're going to get rid of all the progeny of those two acts. We're going to repeal the Human Rights Act. We're going to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. We are not going to replace it with anything new on human rights. Human rights in this country was perfectly assured in 1996 before Tony Blair did all this nonsense. We are going to get rid of all the regulations and laws brought in by this Labour government. Everything they've done is going to be reversed without any consideration for what they've been up to. And we're going to go back to a country which worked extremely well as a country where protocols were observed, hundreds of years of gentle political evolution that had created that wonderful stable bastion of geopolitical not sensibility, sensible governance. That was the UK. That's what we're going to go back to, and we'll do it on day one, Eddie. We'll do it on day one, and we'll stop mass migration. We'll stop the boats before they come into our waters. We will deport anyone here that's illegally here. We will give people who are here legally an incentive to go back home, and we'll make policies for British citizens, for the majority interest. It'll be a seismic change of direction the minute an advanced UK government is formed.
And how do you see that seismic change then cascading into the economic recovery, economic growth, energy back in
So it's absolutely vital that when you do the kind of constitutional changes I've just described, that you are prepared for people like the EU, for institutions like the EU, to have a crack at the United Kingdom. They won't like it. They will react absolutely against what we're doing because they're for the global order and we'll be for the national interest. And so it's doubly important, I've touched on it already, but it's doubly important that we deregulate, we cut taxes on small and medium-sized enterprises, working class, middle class, we slash welfare. People have got to get up, they've got to go back to work. I have sympathy for disabled people and people who've got genuine ailments which prevent them from working, but the vast majority of people need to be working. And there are very many malingerers, I'm afraid, who are abusing the system. So welfare has to be cut. Tax on people who are working have to be cut, and we've got to re-energize our economy and rocket propel the UK. We've got to be right ahead of the curve. And what I'm hoping, Eddie, as well, is that we have a Republican presidency still in 2029, so that all the stuff we're doing is welcomed by the United States of America, as I'm sure Trump would welcome it. And that will also act as a bulwark against the European Union and any belligerence from institutions like the EU.
Yeah, well, I mean, this will be, this will be great for those parties in Europe as well who are addressing similar concerns, but within the European Union, for example, in Poland and in Germany and in Italy and so on, whose strength is growing. So I think that what you're proposing with Advance UK, all the development there is being mirrored elsewhere, and that the change that has been sparked in the US is flown across the North Atlantic as we'd expected, and it's now landing here as well, and people are beginning to to look at their countries and their structures in an entirely new way, which hopefully I hope. Sorry, I may put it as a question. You said earlier on that it was maybe the 11th hour for the United Kingdom. How close is the United Kingdom, do you think, to the point of no return?
It's very close. It's very close to the point of no return. I do think that the next government that we have will be a pro-British government, an overtly pro-British government. What concerns me is that there are some charlatans masquerading as being pro-British. And if they get into office and they're not held to account, or they are, not required and pressured into doing the right thing, then we may go past the 12th hour and it may be all over. And so I'm going to put my heart and soul into making sure Advance UK is successful, and that we, as implausible as it might sound for a 3-month-old party to be saying this, I'm going to put my heart and soul into making sure, as best I can, that we form the next government.
And do you think that you have the kind of numbers already to be able to fight a general election?
Yeah, we do. We've got 37,000 members, and that's good enough to fight a general election. So we can fight a general election tomorrow. I'd rather it wasn't called tomorrow, because we need time to find our candidates, make our policies, draft our legislation. But if it's called at any time, 2027 onwards, we'll be ready.
Well, Ben, I hope to come back to you again as matters develop over the course of 2026. I just want to thank you for coming on Counterpoint. I think it's going to be a very interesting episode for people to tune into Advance UK and into Ben Habib, what he has been saying here to us on Counterpoint. And because there's significant lessons for us to learn, as well as things that we have to be very, very wary of happening next door in our with our nearest neighbours. So Ben, just thank you so much for coming on Counterpoint and for introducing Advance UK to an Irish audience. I think it's going to get a lot of interest over here. I certainly hope so, and we'll be talking again in the near future. Well,
thank you very much.
You know what to do. As I've always end these programs, hit the 2 big buttons, like and subscribe. And if you like this content, make sure you send it around to your friends and tell more people about Counterpoint, where we actually look at the type of stories and policies and decisions that people are making in other countries that are not covered by mainstream media in Ireland for reasons we're all very well aware of. Thank you, and see you at the next episode.